The toaster was crying, not a loud wailing sob, but a quiet, miserable leak of thin black oil that smelled like burnt sugar and regret. Jack Keller watched the dark tear trace, a path down the chrome casing, drip onto the warped linoleum of his kitchen floor, and form a puddle that looked disturbingly like a screaming face. He sighed. This was the third appliance this week. On Tuesday, the radio had started playing a song that hadn't been written yet, a discordant, angry tune that made his teeth ache. Yesterday, the refrigerator had hummed itself into a state of localized winter, coating the entire back wall in a thick layer of frost that glittered with impossible, six-sided snowflakes. This was life after the break. He nudged the puddle with the toe of his worn boot. The screaming face dissolved into a meaningless smear. Gravity was a suggestion these days, a soft-spoken recommendation that the universe mostly ignored. Light sometimes got tired halfway across a room and just gave up, creating pockets of impenetrable shadow. And memory. Memory was the worst. It had become a contaminant, a sticky, infectious substance that seeped out of people and things, replaying moments that should have stayed buried. The world had a ghost, and its name was yesterday. Jack was a scrapper. He made his living picking through the bones of the world before. He'd find old tech, old tools, anything made with the solid, predictable physics of the old days, and sell it to people who were tired of their coffee makers showing them glimpses of their dead pets. The toaster, a classic Sunbeam from 100 years ago, was supposed to be a good find. Solid. Reliable. Now it was just another piece of junk haunted by the last stand. Humanity's last stand, that's what they called it. The day we told the architects, the silent, star-striding things that had come to rearrange our corner of reality, to get lost. We couldn't fight their ships. We couldn't understand their motives, so we did the only thing we could. We threw a rock into the engine of creation. We detonated the Ouroboros bomb at the heart of their terraforming array in the Nevada desert. It wasn't a weapon of blast or heat. It was a weapon of pure logic, designed to sever the connection between cause and effect on a quantum level. It worked. Oh, it worked better than anyone could have imagined. The architects vanished, their fleet dissolving like sugar in hot water. We won. We saved ourselves. And in doing so, we tore the instruction manual for the universe into a billion tiny pieces. We broke the rules, all of them. The black oil from the toaster began to creep across the floor, pooling again. This time, it didn't form a face. It formed a name. 4 letters shimmering in the greasy dark. Lily. Jack's breath hitched in his chest. A cold fist squeezed his heart. "No," he whispered to the empty room. "Not today." Lily, his daughter, she would have been 16 this year. She had died in the final chaotic weeks before the break, not from an architect weapon, but from a simple old-world sickness. The overwhelmed hospitals no longer had the supplies to treat. Her memory was his own private ghost, the one that haunted him more than any weeping appliance. Sometimes in the quiet of the night, he'd hear her laugh, a faint echo that would make him sit bolt upright in his cold bed, his hands reaching for something that was no longer there. He grabbed a rag from the sink, the water sputtering and fizzing as it hit the metal, and wiped the name off the floor. He had to get it away before it solidified, before the memory grew teeth. He'd seen it happen. A whole block in old Denver was now a permanent looping replay of a child's birthday party from 80 years ago, complete with smiling, translucent guests and a cake that never, ever got eaten. The grief of one person, amplified by the broken physics, had turned a city street into a tomb of lost joy. He tossed the oily rag into a metal bin. His hands were shaking. It was getting worse. The echoes, they called them. The scars of strong emotion left on the world. His grief for Lily was a gaping wound, and the world kept trying to scab it over with these cruel reminders. His datapad, a clunky pre-break model that was one of his most prized possessions, chimed on the counter. A new message. That was rare. Most people in Haven, the ramshackle town he called home, used runners or just shouted. Electronic communication was unreliable. Messages got lost in the static of the new reality, sometimes arriving years late, sometimes arriving before they were even sent. He picked it up. The message was encrypted, which was the first odd thing. No one used encryption anymore. It was like putting a brand new lock on a door, with no hinges. The sender ID was just a single black sigil. Oi circle, eating its own tail, Ouroboros. Jack's blood ran cold. He knew the symbol. Everyone did. It was the emblem of the project that had built the bomb. He thumbed the message open. The text was stark and clear, no shimmer, no distortion. Jack Keller, we know who you are. We know what you've lost. The place where the world broke can also be the place where it is mended. We require a scrapper of your skill. Go to the Ouroboros array. Retrieve the core diagnostic unit from the central spire. Bring it to us. Your payment will not be in credits or goods. We will offer you something more. We will offer you a chance to fix the echoes, a chance to have silence again. Jack read the message twice, then a third time. It was impossible. The Ouroboros array, Ground Zero, was the most twisted place on the planet. No one went there. The laws of physics weren't just broken there. They had been thrown into a blender and set to liquefy. It was a suicide mission. But the last line, the promise, a chance to fix the echoes, a chance to get Lily out of the damn toasters and the whispering shadows, a chance for silence, real silence, the kind the world hadn't known for 10 years. He looked at the spot on the floor where his daughter's name had been. He could almost still see it, a faint stain against the grimy linoleum. He could still smell the burnt sugar. A suicide mission. He typed a single word in reply. When? The response came back instantly, as if it had been waiting for him his whole life. Now? The man who called himself Elias Vance lived in the only part of Haven that still remembered what it was like to be rich. The houses on Crestview Drive sat on a stable plate of geology, or maybe just dumb luck, that had spared them the worst of the break. The lawns were green, the paint wasn't peeling, and gravity seemed to hold a particular fondness for the neighborhood, keeping everything firmly planted. It was a bubble of the world before, and it felt as alien to Jack as the moon. Vance's house was a monument of glass and steel, a pre-break architectural marvel that should have twisted into a pretzel of jagged angles years ago. Yet it stood, perfect and serene. Jack walked up the clean-swept path, his worn boots feeling loud and clumsy on the pristine stone. The doors slid open before he could knock, whispering on silent runners. The inside was even more unnerving. It was minimalist, clean and quiet. Too quiet. It was the silence Jack craved, but here it felt sterile and wrong, like the silence of a tomb. Elias Vance stood in the center of the vast open room, framed by a floor-to-ceiling window that looked out over the broken, shimmering plains beyond Haven. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed in a dark suit that probably cost more than Jack's entire hovel. His hair was silver at the temples. His face was handsome in a severe, chiseled way and his eyes were a pale, piercing blue. They didn't blink enough. "Mr. Keller," Vance said. His voice was smooth, polished, without a trace of the weariness that clung to everyone else Jack knew. "Thank you for coming so promptly." "The message was convincing," Jack said, his voice rough. He stopped a good 10 feet away from the man. He didn't like being this close to someone so clean. It made him feel dirty. "Honesty is the most effective tool, I find. Even in a world where truth is a matter of perspective." Vance gestured to a leather chair that looked more like a piece of modern art. "Please." Jack remained standing. "Let's skip the pleasantries. You want me to go to ground zero. You want me to pull a piece of tech out of the heart of hell. You'd have better luck asking a man to go skinny dipping in the sun. Why me?" Vance smiled, a thin, bloodless stretching of his lips. "Because you are the best, Mr. Keller. Your reputation precedes you. You navigate the twisted zones. You understand the new rules, the echoes, the pockets of temporal distortion. You don't fight them, you adapt. And more importantly, you are motivated." "You mean I'm desperate?" Jack grunted. "I mean you have something to gain that no other scrapper does," Vance corrected gently. "Most men want credits, water purifiers, stable tech. They want to live more comfortably in this broken world. You, I suspect, just want the world to be quiet again. You want the ghosts to go back in their graves." The words hit Jack like a physical blow. This man had done his homework. He knew exactly which screws to turn. "What is this core?" Jack asked, changing the subject. "This diagnostic unit." "It is precisely that," Vance said, turning to look out the window. "Before the Ouroboros bomb was detonated, it ran a final system-wide diagnostic. A snapshot of reality as it was meant to be, right down to the last quantum string. The data on that core is a blueprint, a map back to the way things were." "You want to fix it," Jack said, a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years, hope sparking in his chest. "You want to fix the break." Fix is such a strong word, Mr. Keller. "Let's say we want to restore order. The constant chatter of these echoes, the unpredictable shifts in physical law. It's unsustainable. Humanity is a hardy species, but we are slowly being driven mad. The world needs a reset. The core is the key." It made sense. A terrifying, beautiful kind of sense. To be able to walk into a room and not worry that the ghost of a dead loved one was going to pour out of the light fixtures. To be able to throw a ball and know for certain it would come down. "And you can't get it yourself," Jack stated. "My associates and I possess the intellect and the resources to use the core," Vance said, a hint of arrogance coloring his tone. "But we are not field operatives. The array is a place of raw, chaotic physics. It requires a certain instinct, a talent for improvisation. Your talent, Mr. Keller." Jack thought of the crying toaster. He thought of the name on the floor. He thought of the nights he spent listening for a laugh that was only a phantom of electricity in his own grieving brain. The risk was enormous. The probability of him ending up as a smear of screaming protoplasm, stretched across a kilometer of desert, was close to 100%. But the reward? "What's to stop me from taking this core and using it myself?" Jack asked, testing him. Vance finally turned from the window and looked straight at him. His pale blue eyes were cold and deep, like glacial ice. "Because you are a scrapper, Mr. Keller, not a quantum physicist. The core is useless without the infrastructure to decode and implement its data. An infrastructure my associates and I have spent the last decade building in secret. To you, it is a key. To us, it is the key and the knowledge of which lock it fits. And besides, he added, his smile returning, if you betray us, we will find you. And the echoes we can create are far more specific than the random ones you currently endure. It was a threat, plain and simple, wrapped in a silken bow. Jack's hands curled into fists at his sides. He hated this man. He hated his clean suit, his perfect house, and his calm, manipulative voice. But he needed him. I'll need gear, Jack said, his voice flat. The best you've got. A vehicle that can handle the warped terrain. A stability suit, full spectrum sensors, and a down payment. Of course, Vance said, nodding. Everything you require is already being loaded onto a rover at the south gate. The down payment is inside. Consider it a show of good faith. He held out a datapad, a slim modern one that made Jack's look like a brick. A map glowed on its screen. This will guide you. It is shielded against the worst of the temporal and spatial distortions you will encounter. It will lead you to the central spire. Jack took the datapad. It felt cold and unnervingly light in his hand. One more thing, Jack said. This silence you're promising, it's for everyone, right? This isn't just some private party for the rich folks on the hill. Elias Lance's expression didn't flicker. The break affected all of humanity, Mr. Keller. The solution, naturally, must be for all of humanity. He sounded sincere. He sounded like a savior. But as Jack looked into those unblinking blue eyes, he felt a sliver of ice in his own gut. It was the same feeling he got right before the ground decided to forget which way was up. The feeling that something was fundamentally, terribly wrong. But the hope was stronger than the fear. It had to be. I'll leave at sundown, Jack said, turning his back on the man in his sterile, silent house. He walked out into the world of noise and ghosts, the promise of a quiet dawn, the only thing propelling him forward. The south gate of Haven was a rusted barricade of old shipping containers and scavenged cars, manned by tired-looking men with old-world rifles. They waved Jack through with lazy indifference. They were used to scrappers, heading out into the shimmer, the name they gave the unstable lands beyond the town's fragile perimeter. They were also used to them not coming back. Parked just beyond the gate was the rover. It was an ugly, beautiful beast. It wasn't built for speed, but for survival. 6 independently articulated legs, not wheels, would allow it to navigate the treacherous shifting ground. The cockpit was a reinforced sphere of dark, non-reflective metal, designed to shield the occupant from the worst of the physical and psychic fallout. Jack ran a hand over its pitted surface. It felt solid, real. He climbed in. The interior smelled of clean ozone and new machinery. On the passenger seat was a canvas duffel bag. He opened it. Inside were stacks of ration bars, water purification canisters, and a small, heavy metal box. He lifted the lid. It was full of pre-break ammunition, shiny brass cartridges that were worth a fortune. Vance's down payment. Enough to make a man comfortable for life if he lived long enough to spend it. Jack closed the box. Comfort wasn't the goal. Hanging on a hook was the stability suit. It was a dull gray jumpsuit made of a strange, slightly stiff fabric. Woven into it was a fine mesh of what looked like copper wire. It wouldn't stop a bullet, but it was designed to ground the wearer, to create a small, personal bubble of physical normality. It would help dampen the effects of the echoes and resist the minor spatial warps. It wouldn't save him from a direct hit from a major event, but it might keep him sane. He spent the next hour checking the rover's systems, familiarizing himself with the controls. They were surprisingly simple, mostly automated. The advanced navigation system, linked to the datapad Vance had given him, would do most of the hard work. His job was to be the squishy component inside, the one who could make a decision when the computer started dividing by zero. As the sun began to set, casting long, distorted shadows that writhed like living things, Jack leaned back in the pilot's seat and closed his eyes. He let his mind drift, a dangerous habit these days. He thought of Maria, the woman who ran the only bar in Haven, the Glitch. He'd stopped in there before leaving. "You're really going?" she'd asked, wiping down a glass that kept trying to phase into a teacup. Her face was a roadmap of worry. She was one of the few people who knew about Lily, who understood the weight he carried. "I have to, Maria," he'd said, nursing a bottle of lukewarm beer. "No one comes back from the Ouroboros array, Jack. It's not a place, it's a wound. You don't go into a wound. Maybe this time is different." "Hope is a dangerous thing in this world," she'd warned, her dark eyes sad. "It's got sharp edges." He just nodded, finished his beer and left. She was right, of course. Hope was dangerous. But what was the alternative? To sit in his hovel and wait for the day his own grief manifested and turned his kitchen into a permanent monument to a dead child? To let the memory of Lily be twisted into a monster that haunted the very air he breathed? Dumb and Burr, he would rather walk into the fire. A flicker of movement outside the rover's viewport snapped him back to the present. A small dog, a scruffy terrier mix, was trotting down the dusty road from Haven. But something was wrong with it. Its back legs were moving slightly faster than its front legs, giving it a strange, uncoordinated gait. As it passed under one of the sputtering sodium lamps, its shadow detached from its feet and scurried off into the darkness on its own. The dog didn't seem to notice. It just kept trotting, a perfect little example of the quiet madness of their new world. Jack engaged the rover's ignition. The engine hummed to life, a low, steady thrum that was immensely comforting. He looked at the daypad. A single, glowing line pointed out into the deepening twilight, straight into the heart of the shimmer. The Ouroboros array was 500 miles away. 500 miles of chaos. He thought of Lily one last time. Not the sick, fading girl in the hospital bed, but the laughing 5-year-old on his shoulders, her small hands tangled in his hair as she pointed at a bird in the sky. A pre-break sky, a perfect, boring, beautiful blue. The memory was so clear, so pure it hurt more than any echo. It was real, and it was what he was fighting for. To make the world safe for memories like that again. To give them a place to live without being twisted into weapons. "Okay, kiddo," he whispered to the empty cockpit. "Let's go see where the world ended." With a lurch, the 6-legged rover stood up, its metal feet finding purchase on the cracked asphalt. It turned its armored nose towards the wasteland and began to walk, stepping out of the faint glow of Haven and into the waiting, broken dark. The world outside of Haven was painted by a broken artist. In the first few miles, the changes were subtle. The scrub brush grew in tight, geometric spirals. The rocks by the roadside were unnaturally smooth, polished by a wind that didn't seem to be blowing. Jack saw a coyote, its fur the color of a television screen tuned to a dead channel. And it stared back at him, with 3 glowing eyes before dissolving into a cloud of static and blowing away. He kept his eyes on the road, his knuckles white on the controls. The stability suit was a clammy, second skin, and he could feel a faint vibration from the copper mesh, a low hum that seemed to be pushing back against the world, The rover's cabin was his sanctuary. The readouts on his console were his only connection to the old, sane world. Altitude, stable. Cabin pressure, stable. Chronometer, stable. Outside, however, the chronometer was a liar. He was about 50 miles out when he hit the first pocket of temporal distortion. The rover's sensors blared a warning. A calm female voice announcing, "Temporal anomaly detected. Duration unknown." The world outside the viewport smeared. The sun, which had set hours ago, rocketed back up into the sky, streaked across the zenith, and set again, all in the space of about 5 seconds. The landscape flickered between day and night like a faulty lamp. Jack's stomach lurched. He felt a wave of dizzying vertigo, a sensation of living a whole day in a single heartbeat. Then, just as suddenly, it was over. The world was dark again. The stars in the wrong places, and his own chronometer showed that only a minute had passed. His body, however, felt like it had been awake for 24 hours straight. This was the nature of the Twisted Lands. You didn't just travel through space, you traveled through moments, through possibilities, through the discarded rough drafts of reality. The datapad's glowing line remained steady, a single thread of logic in a world of nonsense. He trusted it. He had to. It was all he had. By what his body told him was the next morning, the landscape had grown truly alien. He passed through a petrified forest where the trees were made of a substance that looked like smoky glass. Inside the trunks, he could see the frozen, screaming shapes of birds and small animals, trapped forever in the moment of their transformation. He saw a river that flowed uphill, its water a thick, silver substance like mercury, and on its banks, flowers bloomed and wilted in a frantic, repeating cycle. The echoes were stronger out here too. They weren't the subtle, personal hauntings of Haven. They were big, raw, and impersonal. He crested a ridge and saw a battle raging in the valley below. Ghostly figures in pre-break military uniforms fired weapons that made no sound. Phantom explosions threw up clouds of spectral dust. It was a memory of the war against the architects, a psychic scar left on the land. The rover's sensors identified it as a level 4. Echo event. The automated voice advised a wide detour. But the datapad's line went straight through the middle of it. No choice then, Jack muttered to himself, his mouth dry. He engaged the rover's stealth systems, which were supposed to minimize their physical and psychic signature. The hum of the engine dropped to a whisper. He guided the machine down into the Valley of Ghosts. The spectral soldiers paid him no mind. They were locked in their endless silent struggle. He drove past a young woman in a communications helmet, her mouth open in a scream that he couldn't hear, her hand outstretched towards a fallen comrade who was already fading into transparency. For a horrifying second, she looked like Lily. Not in the face, but in the sheer desperate terror in her eyes. Jack flinched, gripping the controls tighter. The stability suit buzzed, a sharp, angry vibration against his skin, as if fighting off the emotional contagion. He had to get through. He focused on the line on the datapad, ignoring the phantom war. He was a rock in a river of ghosts. He was solid. They were just memories, just bad dreams. That's when he saw it. In the center of the valley, a new kind of echo. It wasn't a memory of a person or an event. It was a memory of a law of physics. A sphere of perfect shimmering blackness about 20 feet in diameter hung in the air. It was a hole in the world, a pocket of absolute nothing. Around its edges, rocks and dirt were being slowly, inexorably pulled in, disintegrating into motes of light as they touched the event horizon. It was an echo of a singularity, a stray thought from the Ouroboros bomb that had decided to take up residence in the Nevada desert. The glowing line on his map went right past it. Dangerously close. He eased the rover forward one leg at a time. The pull from the singularity was gentle at first, a faint tugging sensation. The rover's console flashed a red warning. Gravitational anomaly detected. He fought the pull, angling the rover away, its powerful legs digging into the tortured soil. The ghostly battle raged around him, a silent, distracting chaos. He saw a spectral tank flicker and dissolve as it got too close to the sphere of nothing. The pull grew stronger. The rover groaned, metal protesting under the unnatural strain. He was sweating now the stability suit, feeling hot and suffocating. He was almost past it. Just a few more feet. Then, one of the rover's front legs slipped on a patch of loose shale. The entire vehicle led sideways, directly towards the black sphere. The alarm screamed. The world outside the viewport tilted violently. He was going in. This was it. This was how it ended, pulled apart into atoms by a ghost of gravity. In that last terrifying moment, an image flashed in his mind. Lily, age 7. Learning to ride her bike, she fell, scraped her knee, and looked at him with big, tearful eyes. "I can't do it, Daddy." He remembered what he told her. "Yes, you can. Just look where you want to go. Don't look at the ground. Look at me." He wrenched his eyes away from the sphere of nothing and focused on a rock outcrop 100 yards ahead. He poured all his power into the legs on the far side of the rover, pushing, shoving, fighting the irresistible pull with sheer, desperate force. Metal screamed. The rover shuddered, every bolt and plate straining to the breaking point. For a heart-stopping second, it was a perfect stalemate. Then, with a final, grinding shriek, the leg found purchase. The rover righted itself and scrambled away from the edge of the void, skittering sideways like a frightened crab. Jack collapsed back into his seat, breathing in ragged, painful gasps. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He had survived. He looked at the console. The gravitational warning was gone. He looked in the rearview monitor. The black sphere hung in the valley, silent and patient, waiting for its next victim. The ghost soldiers continued their endless, pointless war. He had made it through, but the array was still hundreds of miles away. The welcome mat to hell had been bad enough. He didn't want to imagine what the front door looked like. The deeper Jack pushed into the twisted lands, the more the world seemed to be actively trying to unmake him. The rules weren't just broken out here. They were being rewritten, erased, and scribbled over every few miles. He drove through a region where sound traveled faster than light, so he would see the landscape shatter into 1,000 pieces before hearing the deafening roar of its collapse. He navigated a canyon where the color blue had been entirely deleted from the spectrum, leaving the sky a sickly, jaundiced yellow, and the river a flat, metallic gray. The stability suit was working overtime, its constant, low-level hum a permanent feature of his existence. It fought off the worst of the disorientation, but it couldn't stop the creeping psychological erosion. He started to have trouble remembering simple things, like his mother's first name or what coffee tasted like. The world before was becoming a distant, fuzzy dream, while this new, insane reality was becoming sharp and clear. This, he realized, was how people went mad out here. Their minds just adapted too well. After what the chronometer insisted was 3 days of travel, he encountered the worst echo yet. It wasn't a battle scene or a physical anomaly. It was a feeling. He was crossing a vast flat salt pan, the ground cracked and white, under a sky the color of a bruise. The rover's senses suddenly went haywire, the calm female voice becoming a frantic, stuttering mess. Emotional. Echo, level 7. Detected. Source, Papam, human. Grief, overload. Then it hit him. A wave of pure, undiluted sorrow, so immense and powerful it felt like a physical weight. It slammed into the rover, and even through the layers of shielding and the humming suit. Jack felt it in the marrow of his bones. It was the collective grief of every human who had lost someone in the final days of the war. It was the sorrow of billions, concentrated into a psychic maelstrom. He gasped, clutching his chest. Tears streamed down his face, hot and sudden. He wasn't crying for Lily. He was crying for everyone, for the soldier in the Phantom Valley, for the mothers and fathers and sons and daughters, for a whole species that had been forced to sacrifice its own sanity to survive. The grief was a living thing, a vast, invisible ocean, and he was drowning in it. The rover's systems began to fail. The lights flickered. The engine sputtered. The machine was literally being depressed, its function slowing down under the crushing weight of the emotional fallout. "No," Jack choked out, his own voice thick with a sorrow that wasn't his. "No, you don't." He knew what he had to do. He couldn't fight this thing. It was too big. He couldn't outrun it. It was everywhere. He had to do what the scrapper in him knew best. He had to find a counter frequency. He had to find an opposite emotion. He fumbled with the rover's audio system, his fingers thick and clumsy. He bypassed the standard channels and jacked his own datapad into the external speakers. He scrolled through the few personal files he had left, the ones he never looked at. He found it, a video file, old and corrupted but still playable. He hit play and routed the audio to the external emitters at maximum volume. Lily's laugh filled the cabin. It was from her 6th birthday party, a high, pure, utterly joyful sound, full of life and cake and uncomplicated happiness. It was the sound of a world that made sense. It was the most powerful weapon he had. The laugh blasted out into the salt flats, a tiny pinpoint of light against an ocean of darkness. At first, nothing happened. The wave of grief was too immense. The rover continued to die around him. He closed his eyes, forcing himself to remember. Not the sadness of her loss, but the joy of her life. The way she'd crinkle her nose when she smiled. The feel of her small hand in his. The ridiculous knock-knock jokes she used to tell. He poured all of his own memory, his own love into that single, repeating sound. Lily's laugh, amplified by the rover speakers, pushed back against the great sadness. The oppressive weight in the cabin lessened, just a fraction. The lights flickered back on. The engine coughed, then caught its hum returning to a steady rhythm. Outside, the world seemed to brighten. The bruised purple of the sky softened. Jack kept the recording on a loop, the sound of his daughter's joy a shield against the world's pain. He guided the rover forward, inch by agonizing inch, through the heart of the great sorrow. The grief was still there, a crushing pressure on all sides. But he had his own little bubble of defiance, a tiny laughing bubble in the middle of a weeping universe. He drove for what felt like an eternity. Lily's laughter the only thing keeping him from curling up into a ball and letting the sadness consume him. He was using his own memories as a weapon, the very things that had haunted him for so long. The irony was not lost on him. Finally, after hours that felt like years, he felt the pressure ease. He was through it. He had crossed the sea of sorrow. He looked at the rover's console. All systems were green. He was exhausted, emotionally scoured raw, but he was intact. He stopped the rover and switched off the recording. The sudden silence was immense. He sat there trembling. As the adrenaline faded, he had faced down the collective grief of his entire species with the sound of one little girl's laugh. Maria was wrong. Hope wasn't just a thing with sharp edges. It was a shield. It was a sword. It was the only thing that could cut through the dark. He looked at the datapad. The glowing line pointed ahead. He was close now, very close. The horizon was dominated by a jagged black shape that clawed at the sky. A monument of twisted metal and shattered concrete, humming with a visible aura of wrongness. The Ouroboros Array, Ground Zero. He had arrived at the wound. The Ouroboros Array was not a building. It was a scar. A 50-square-mile testament to mankind's desperate, reality-shattering victory. The central spire, a mangled finger of black metal, pointing an accusation at the sick sky, was visible for miles. As Jack's rover drew closer, the laws of physics didn't just bend. They shattered into incoherent dust. The ground around the array was a mosaic of impossible states. Patches of earth were frozen in time, preserving the footprints of soldiers who had died 10 years ago. Other sections were accelerated, with tiny, weed-like plants sprouting, growing to maturity, and crumbling to dust in the space of a few seconds. Gravity here was a game of roulette. The rover's legs had to constantly adjust as the pull shifted from 10 times normal to near zero. At one point, a rock the size of a house floated serenely past the viewport, tumbling in slow motion. The air itself was thick with visual static, a constant shimmer that made it hard to focus. And the noise. It wasn't a sound you heard with your ears, but with your teeth, a deep grinding hum that vibrated through the rover's chassis and up Jack's spine. It was the sound of reality screaming. He parked the rover a mile from the base of the central spire, as close as the datapad's safety protocols would allow. Proceed on foot from this point, the calm female voice instructed. Vehicle integrity cannot be guaranteed beyond this perimeter. Jack suited up. He pulled the hood of the stability suit over his head, sealing himself in. He checked the charge on his sidearm, a heavy caliber pistol that was probably useless against whatever was in there. But it felt good in his hand. He slung the canvas bag with his supplies over his shoulder. In it was a small, powerful cutting torch, a multi-tool, and the heavy metal box designed to carry the diagnostic core. He took a deep breath of the rover's filtered, sane air, and then opened the hatch. The outside world hit him like a physical blow. The hum was louder, a nauseating, soul-deep thrum. The air tasted of ozone and hot metal, and something else. Something old and abstract, like the concept of rust, or the feeling of being forgotten. He had to lean against the rover for a moment, his senses reeling. The stability suit buzzed frantically, trying to insulate him from the sheer wrongness of the place. He looked at the datapad. The glowing line pointed directly at a gaping, torn hole in the base of the spire. His entrance. "Look where you want to go," he muttered to himself, the words a desperate mantra. He started walking. Each step was a negotiation with the universe. His left foot would land with a heavy leaden thud, while his right would feel light and floaty. The ground shimmered under his boots, sometimes appearing solid, sometimes translucent. He saw echoes of the men and women who had worked here, their phantom forms flickering in and out of existence. A scientist in a lab coat walked straight through him, her face a mask of grim determination. A soldier sat against a ruined wall, his head in his hands, his form so faint he was barely more than a heat haze. These weren't the contained looping memories of the outer lands. Here, the past was a chaotic, bleeding wound, leaking into the present without rhyme or reason. As he got closer to the spire, the effects grew more pronounced. He saw a puddle on the ground ahead of him. As he watched, a perfect, detailed reflection of a star-filled night sky appeared in it, even though the sunless yellow sky was still overhead. He carefully stepped around it. He saw a doorway that led into a wall of solid rock, and a section of that same rock that was transparent, showing the churning, chaotic machinery within the spire's heart. He reached the hole in the spire's base. It was a jagged wound of torn metal 20 feet high. The hum from within was a palpable force, pushing against him. He took another breath, tasting metal and regret, and stepped inside. The interior of the Ouroboros array was a nightmare of broken geometry. Corridors twisted at impossible angles, ending in sheer drops or looping back on themselves. Stairways ran up walls and across ceilings. It was a labyrinth designed by a mad god, a place where the rules of space and time had been put through a meat grinder. The data pad was his only guide, its glowing line cutting through the chaos, sometimes pointing straight through a solid wall. Jack learned quickly. When the line went through a wall, he just had to wait. Sooner or later, the wall would flicker out of existence, or a doorway would phase into being where none had been before. The place was in a constant state of flux, rearranging itself moment by moment. Patience was survival. The echoes inside were worse, more personal. They weren't just visual, they were sensory. He walked through a patch of air and was suddenly overwhelmed by the smell of coffee and burnt toast, the memory of some long-dead technician's last breakfast. He turned a corner and was hit by a wave of pure, unadulterated terror, the final emotion of a soldier who died on that spot. The stability suit flared, the buzz turning into a high-pitched whine, and Jack staggered back, gasping, the phantom fear clinging to him like a shroud. He pushed on, deeper into the spire's gut. He was a rat in a maze, and the maze was alive and insane. He followed the datapad's line down a corridor that seemed to stretch to infinity. The walls were lined with broken computer terminals, their screens flashing with error messages and frantic final warnings. Continuum breach imminent. Causality failure in sector gamma. Reality anchor at 2% integrity. This was the diary of the end of the world. He was walking through the last moments of the human race, as it used to be. He came to a vast, cavernous chamber in the heart of the spire. This had to be the main control room. Broken catwalks crisscrossed a chasm of indeterminate depth, from which the soul-shaking hum emanated. In the center of the chamber, on a raised platform that was miraculously intact, was a single large console. A small green light blinked on its surface. The datapad's line pointed directly at that console. The diagnostic core was there. He started to cross one of the catwalks, a narrow, rusty strip of metal suspended over nothing. He was halfway across when the hum from below intensified, rising in pitch until it was a physical scream of sound. And then something rose from the chasm. It wasn't an echo of a person nor a thing. It was an echo of an idea. It was the physical manifestation of the array's purpose, to break reality. It was a creature of pure chaos, a shifting, unstable mass of mismatched geometry and raw, crackling energy. It had too many limbs, all of them moving in ways that joints were not meant to. It had a head that was a swirling vortex of colors that didn't exist. It was the ghost in the machine. It was the break given form. The creature fixed its non-existent gaze on him. It let out a shriek that was made of static and dial tones and a sound of tearing metal. It was the guardian of the core, and it was blocking his path. The thing that had risen from the chasm was an insult to biology. It moved with a fluid, unnatural grace, its form constantly shifting. One moment it had long, spindly legs like a spider. The next it had thick, muscular tentacles. It was a nightmare's collage, stitched together from the spare parts of creation. Jack named it the glitch. It blocked the catwalk, its vortex of a head swirling with maddening colors. The shriek it had let out echoed in Jack's skull, a sound that felt like it was trying to erase his thoughts. His first instinct was to draw his pistol, but he knew that was useless. How do you shoot an idea? How do you put a bullet in a broken law of physics? He did the only thing he could. He backed away slowly, keeping his eyes on the creature. The glitch didn't advance. It just watched him, its presence a crushing weight on the already unstable reality of the room. It was the spire's immune system, and Jack was the virus. He retreated to the corridor he'd come from, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the inside of his ribs. He leaned against a flickering wall, trying to think. He couldn't fight it. He couldn't outrun it. He had to outsmart it. But how do you outsmart something that doesn't obey logic? He looked at his datapad. The glowing line still pointed to the console, right through the glitch. Useless. He swiped through the datapad's other functions, anything Vance might have included. He found a schematic of the spire, a pre-break blueprint. It was mostly useless now, a map of a place that no longer existed. But it showed the power conduits. It showed the flow of energy that still kept this place humming. An idea sparked in his mind, a stupid, suicidal idea. But it was the only one he had. The glitch was a creature of the break, a being of chaos. It fed on the ambient, reality-warping energy of the spire. What if he could cut off its food source? Or, better yet, what if he could give it indigestion? According to the schematic, a major power conduit ran directly beneath the catwalk. If he could overload it, create a surge of raw, unstable energy, maybe it would be enough to disrupt the creature, to make it dehour for a few precious seconds. The problem was, the access panel for the conduit was on the other side of the main chamber. He'd have to find another way around. He consulted the schematic again, comparing it to the shifting, impossible architecture around him. There, a maintenance tunnel. If it still existed. He spent the next hour navigating a treacherous, mind-bending path through the spire's guts. He crawled through vents that dripped a viscous, time-distorting fluid. He climbed ladders that phased in and out of existence. He had to time his movements perfectly, a deadly game of hopscotch with reality itself. The entire time, he could feel the glitch's presence, a cold, watchful intelligence at the back of his mind. Finally, he found it. A rusted, circular hatch with the words "Conduit Access C-7" stenciled on it. He wrenched it open and slipped inside. The tunnel was dark and narrow, and the deep hum of the spire was 100 times louder in here. He could feel it in his bones, making his teeth vibrate. He followed the tunnel until he was, according to the schematic, directly opposite the main chamber entrance. He found the access panel, a heavy plate bolted to the wall. Using his multi-tool, he undid the bolts and pried it open. Inside was a thick braided cable, as thick as his arm, pulsing with a faint sickly purple light. This was the main artery. This was the power source for this whole section of hell. He took the cutting torch from his bag. His plan was simple and insane. He would sever the cable. This would cause a massive, uncontrolled energy backlash. The schematic showed that the energy would surge back towards the main chamber before the system shut down. It would be a tidal wave of pure chaos. It would either destroy the glitch, or it would destroy the entire spire, him along with it. A 50-50 shot, best odds he'd had all day. He took a deep breath, ignited the torch and pressed the searing blue flame to the cable. The effect was instantaneous. The cable screamed, a high-pitched shriek of tortured energy. The purple light inside flared into a blinding white. The hum of the spire rose to an unbearable crescendo. Jack squeezed his eyes shut, shielding them with his arm as sparks and globules of raw energy filled the narrow tunnel. The rover's automated voice, tinny and distorted, crackled in his helmet from the dead pad. Warning. Massive energy surge detected. Structural integrity compromise. He felt the entire spire shudder, a deep, groaning tremor that threw him against the wall. He had done it. Now for the hard part. He scrambled back out of the tunnel and ran. He sprinted through the shifting corridors back towards the main chamber. He had maybe a minute, 2 at most, before the surge hit. The spire was coming apart around him. Sections of the ceiling fell, dissolving into dust before they hit the floor. The walls flickered, showing him glimpses of other places, other times. A desert under a blue sky, a room full of stars, a brief terrifying flash of a city made of black, jagged crystal. The architect's home, maybe. He burst back into the main chamber. The glitch was still there, but it was agitated. It was thrashing back and forth on the catwalk, its form flickering wildly. It seemed to be drawing the surging energy into itself, growing larger, more unstable. It was feeding on the chaos. His plan hadn't worked. He had just made it stronger. But he was out of time. He had to go now. He took a running start and leaped onto the catwalk, sprinting directly towards the enraged, supercharged creature. The glitch let out a roar of static and lunged at him. In that split second, Jack didn't dodge. He did something else. He threw his heavy metal tool bag at it. The creature, a being of pure energy and thought, didn't know how to react to a simple, solid, physical object. It tried to absorb the bag, to phase through it, but the bag was full of old-world metal. It was a chunk of simple, boring, predictable reality. For a fraction of a second, the glitch was confused. Its chaotic form stuttered. That was the opening Jack needed. He slid under its flailing, mismatched limbs, the soles of his boots scraping on the metal of the catwalk. He was through. He scrambled to his feet and ran the last 20 feet to the central console. The green light was still blinking. A small panel on the console was open, revealing a slot. The diagnostic core, a crystalline prism of humming, intricate light, was sitting right there. He reached out and grabbed it. It was warm to the touch, and it vibrated with a clean, orderly energy that was the exact opposite of the spire's chaotic hum. He had it. He turned to run, but it was too late. The glitch had recovered. It was bigger now, a towering monstrosity of pure rage, and it was between him and the exit. Behind it, the catwalk he had just crossed dissolved into a shower of rusty flakes. He was trapped on the platform. The creature raised a limb made of solidified television static and brought it crashing down towards him. Jack closed his eyes. This was the end. He had the key, but he was never getting out of the lock. The killing blow never landed. Jack opened his eyes. The glitch was frozen mid-strike, its limb of static crackling inches from his face. The entire chamber was silent. The soul-grinding hum of the spire had ceased. The chaotic flickering of the walls had stopped, freezing on an image of a calm, empty desert at twilight. The world had gone still. Jack looked down at the diagnostic core in his hand. It was glowing with a fierce white light, and the clean, orderly vibration had intensified, pushing back against the chaos of the array. It had created a bubble of stability, a tiny island of the old rules in an ocean of madness. It had saved him. But he was still trapped. The catwalk was gone. The glitch was a frozen statue of hate just a few feet away. He didn't know how long the core's protective bubble would last. He looked at the console in front of him. Most of it was dead, but one small screen was still active, powered by the core's residual energy. On it, lines of text were scrolling rapidly. It wasn't an error log. It looked like a transcript. He leaned closer. The text was dated 10 years ago, from the final minutes before the Ouroboros bomb was detonated. It was a conversation. Teacher Led Hansen, reality anchor is failing. The architect's terraforming wave is rewriting local physics. We have maybe 90 seconds. General Mears overcomes. We are out of options, Hansen. The order is given. Fire the bomb. Tech-led Hansen. Sir, the final simulations are inconclusive. The break won't just be external. The weapon resonates on a cognitive frequency. It targets the underlying principles of reality, and human consciousness is deeply tied to those principles. We are part of the system. General Mears. What are you saying, son? Son, speak English. Tech-led Hansen. I am saying the bomb won't just break their reality. It will break ours. It will merge the subjective with the objective. Our thoughts, our memories, our emotions, they'll become part of the physical world. We'll be haunted by our own ghosts, literally. We'll be trading one monster for billions of smaller ones. General Mears. It's a choice between being erased and being haunted. I'll take haunted. Fire the damn thing. Teach-led Hansen. God help us all. Initiating detonation sequence. Jack stared at the screen, his blood turning to ice. A chance to fix the echoes. That's what Vance had said. A map back to the way things were. He was a liar. The transcript was clear. The break wasn't a bug. It was a feature. It was a fundamental consequence of the weapon they had used. The echoes weren't a sickness to be cured. They were the new anatomy of the universe. Humanity hadn't just broken the laws of physics. They had become the laws of physics. Every strong emotion, every vivid memory was now a potential force of nature. The crying toaster, the ghost soldiers, the sea of sorrow, it was all just them. Humanity's own psychic fallout made real. And the core. It wasn't a blueprint to fix things. It was a snapshot of the moment before the change. It was a key, just as Vance had said, but what lock did it fit? Another file flickered onto the screen. It wasn't a transcript. It was a project proposal. Sender ID, Elias Vance. It was dated just 1 year after the break. Proptixit propol. Reality reclamation. Premise. The Ouroboros event has irrevocably merged human consciousness with the baseline reality matrix. This presents not a crisis, but an opportunity. The previous laws of physics were arbitrary and restrictive. The new paradigm allows for direct, will-based manipulation of the physical world. Objective: to gain control of this new paradigm. The diagnostic core from the Ouroboros array contains the base code, the root key to the old reality. By interfacing this core with a purpose-built cognitive amplification array, a single focused consciousness can override the chaotic collective unconsciousness of humanity. One mind can impose its will upon the fabric of space-time, establishing a new, stable, and controlled reality. Conclusion. The Age of Gods was a myth. The Age of God can be a reality. I, Elias Vance, will be that guiding consciousness. I will silence the noise. I will impose order. I will be the architect of the new world. Jack stumbled back from the console, the core feeling like a venomous snake in his hand. It was all a lie. The whole thing. Vance didn't want to fix the world. He wanted to own it. He didn't want to silence the echoes. He wanted to become the only voice. He would erase the messy, chaotic, beautiful, and terrible symphony of human consciousness, and replace it with his own sterile, silent, perfect song. He would become a god, and all of humanity would be nothing more than clay for him to shape. The clean house, the perfect suit, the unblinking eyes. It all made sense now. He was a man who hated mess. And humanity was very, very messy. The white light from the core flickered. The bubble of stability was weakening. The glitch twitched, its static limb humming with renewed energy. The frozen desert on the walls began to shimmer. Time was starting to flow again. Jack was faced with a choice that made the glitch look like a minor inconvenience. He could escape, maybe. The core's stability field might last long enough for him to find another way out. He could take the core to Vance, hand over the keys to reality to a megalomaniac, and in exchange, maybe get his silence. A quiet world ruled by a tyrant. No more ghosts of Lily. Just the quiet hum of Vance's perfect, sterile order. Or he could destroy the core. He could throw it into the chasm, back into the chaotic energy that spawned it. He would be stranded here, almost certainly doomed to die in the heart of the collapsing spire. And the world would stay broken forever, haunted by its own memories. A chaotic mess of weeping, toasters and uphill rivers. An easy death and a quiet hell, or a certain death to preserve a chaotic freedom. The glitch let out a low growl of static as it began to move again. The choice had to be made now. And in the sudden, roaring return of the spire's noise, Jack heard another sound, faint but clear. A little girl's laugh. Not from a recording this time. It was in his own head, a pure memory. Lily on the swing set, her feet kicking at the sky. A perfect pre-break sky. She wasn't an echo. She wasn't a ghost. She was a memory. His memory. Messy, painful, beautiful, and his. And he knew, with a sudden gut-wrenching certainty, that he would rather live in a world haunted by his daughter's ghost than in a world where he was forced to forget her laugh. Vance wanted to erase the mess, but the mess was all they had left. The mess was them. He looked at the seething, chaotic creature in front of him. He looked at the humming, orderly core in his hand. He looked at the deep, dark chasm below. He made his choice. The glitch was fully mobile now, its chaotic form surging with the spire's restored energy. It loomed over Jack, a physical manifestation of the broken world. It was everything he had come here to escape. The chaos, the unpredictability, the madness. And Jack held its opposite in his hand. The core was a promise of order, of silence, of an end to the noise. It was Vance's promise. It was the easy way out. He looked the glitch in its swirling, colorless vortex of a head. He felt a strange sense of kinship with the monster. They were both just creatures of the new world, trying to exist. The glitch was honest in its chaos. Vance hid his tyranny behind a mask of serenity. With a defiant yell that was lost in the spire's roar, Jack turned his back on the monster and ran, not for an exit, but for the edge of the broken platform. The glitch shrieked, a sound of fury and confusion, and lunged. Jack didn't look back. He leaped into the chasm. For a terrifying second he was falling. The wind screamed past him, pulling him down into the humming, energetic heart of the array. This was it. Suicide. But he wasn't giving up. He was making a trade. He held the diagnostic core out in front of him. "You want order?" he screamed at the universe. "Here it is." He threw the core down with all his might into the swirling energy below. The prism of light and logic tumbled into the raw chaos. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, the two opposing forces met, order and chaos. A perfect idea and a broken reality. The spire's deep hum stopped. It was replaced by a sound Jack had never heard before. A pure, crystalline note that seemed to vibrate in the space between atoms. A wave of brilliant white light erupted from the chasm, so pure and clean it was painful to look at. It wasn't a light of heat or energy, but a light of pure information, of absolute certainty. It was the light of the world before. The light wave slammed into Jack. It didn't burn him. It passed through him. And in that instant, he felt a profound, unbelievable sense of peace. The stability suit overloaded and went dead. The frantic buzzing in his skull stopped. The constant, low-level anxiety that had been his companion for 10 years vanished. For the first time since the break, his mind was completely and utterly quiet. He felt the pull of gravity, simple, honest, and downward. The light expanded, hitting the glitch. The creature of chaos convulsed. It couldn't exist in a field of such perfect logic. Its mismatched limbs tried to pull apart. Its vortex head spun faster and faster. It let out one final, screeching wail of static, a sound of profound indignation, and then it simply ceased to be. It dissolved into nothing, erased by the pure concept of order. The light wave continued to expand, washing over the entire chamber. The impossible geometry of the room shuddered. Stairways that ran up walls crumbled to dust. Corridors that looped back on themselves snapped straight. The phantom images of soldiers and scientists winked out of existence. The chamber was forcing itself to obey the old rules, and the parts that couldn't, the parts that were too broken, were being annihilated. Jack was still falling, but the fall was different now. It was a simple, predictable Newtonian fall. He was going to hit the bottom of the chasm and be smeared into a fine paste. A logical, orderly death. Then something snagged his foot. He looked up. A thick power cable, shaken loose from the ceiling by the tremor, had snaked down and wrapped around his ankle. He was dangling upside down, 100 feet above the floor of the chasm, which was now lit by the soft, fading glow of the dying core. He hung there, swaying, the blood rushing to his head. He was alive. He was alive. He was alive, and everything was quiet. The spire was just a ruined building now, not a living wound. He had done it. He hadn't fixed the world, but he had destroyed the tool that could have been used to enslave it. He had forced a stalemate. He began the long, painful process of climbing the cable, hand over hand, his muscles screaming in protest. It was the hardest physical thing he had ever done, but it was simple, it was straightforward. There were no tricks, no distortions, no ghosts. Just him a cable, and gravity. It was beautiful. By the time he hauled himself back up to the level of the control room, the white light from the chasm had faded completely. The deep hum of the spire was gone, replaced by the whisper of wind through broken metal. The place was dead. The echoes were gone. At least here, in this one small spot on Earth, the old rules had been reasserted with a vengeance. He was bruised, exhausted, and dangling from a rope, but he felt a sense of victory that was as pure and clean as the light had been. He hadn't saved the world. He had just given it a chance to save itself, to learn to live with its ghosts instead of trying to exorcise them. He found a different path out of the spire, a series of maintenance ladders that were now reliably solid. The gravity was still fickle. The world was still broken. The cause effect had been localized. A powerful but temporary reset. He looked at the rover, a mile away, a tiny speck of familiarity in the alien landscape. It was a long walk, but he didn't mind. For the first time in a decade, the only ghosts walking with him were the ones he chose to remember, and that felt like freedom. The walk back to the rover was a pilgrimage through a changed land. The world was still broken, but Jack was different. The silence in his head, the after effect of the core's destruction, was a balm. The shimmering air and the trickster gravity no longer felt like a personal assault. They were just the weather. He had faced the heart of the chaos and survived. The rest of this was just noise. When he reached the rover, it was covered in a fine layer of white dust, the fallout from the spire's reset. He climbed inside. The systems flickered to life. The calm female voice spoke. "Welcome, Jack Keller. All systems operational. New directive receive." Jack frowned. New directive? From who? The screen on the console lit up. It was a message from Vance. The timestamp showed it had arrived just moments after the energy surge from the spire. Vance's surveillance must have been good enough to detect it. The message was one word: traitor. Jack almost laughed. He imagined Vance in his perfect sterile house, watching his dream of godhood dissolve into a meaningless energy spike on a monitor. He imagined the man's cold fury. There would be consequences. Vance would not let this go. He would send men. He would try to hunt Jack down, but Jack wasn't afraid. Fear was an echo, and he had learned how to live with them. He started the long journey back to Haven. He drove through the Valley of the Ghost Soldiers, but now they seemed different. Less menacing. They were just pictures in a book, sad and faded. He passed the spot where the sphere of nothing had been. It was gone, collapsed by the same wave of order that had erased the glitch. In its place was a crater of glassy black sand. He drove through the sea of sorrow, but the crushing weight was gone. There was still a sadness in the air, a profound melancholy, but it no longer tried to drown him. It was just an ache now, the memory of a wound instead of the wound itself. Lily's laughter stayed silent on his daytad. He didn't need it as a shield anymore. When he saw the rusted barricades of Haven on the horizon, he felt a sense of homecoming he hadn't expected. The town was a mess. It was run down, full of broken things and broken people. But it was his mess. It was their mess, and it was real. He didn't go back to his hovel. He drove the rover straight to the glitch. He parked the ugly, beautiful machine out front and walked in. The bar was quiet, only a few patrons nursing their drinks. Maria was behind the counter, wiping it down with a rag. She looked up when he entered, and her eyes went wide. She dropped the rag. "Jack," she whispered, as if seeing a ghost. "Maria," he said, and his voice was hoarse. He slid onto a bar stool. He was caked in dust and grime. His face was gaunt, and he knew he looked like he'd been to hell and back, which he had. "I thought you were dead," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Close," he admitted. "Whiskey, the good stuff if you have any." She reached under the counter and pulled out a dusty bottle of pre-break bourbon, the kind she saved for special occasions. She poured him a generous amount in a glass that was, for the moment, staying a glass. Her hand was shaking. "Did you find it?" she asked quietly so the others couldn't hear. "Did you do what you set out to do?" Jack looked at the amber liquid in his glass. He thought of Vance's lie, of the truth in the spire, of the choice he had made. He hadn't brought back silence, he hadn't fixed the world. He had done something much more important. He had accepted it. "I found what I needed to," he said. "The world's still broken, Maria. I think it's going to stay that way." She looked disappointed for a second, then a look of understanding dawned on her face. She looked at him, really looked at him. At the calmness in his eyes, the weariness was there, but the haunting was gone. "But you are okay?" she asked. It was the most important question. Jack took a sip of the bourbon. It burned a clean, honest path down his throat. He looked around the bar at the flickering lights, at the man in the corner, whose reflection was 10 seconds behind his movements, at the quiet, resilient strength of people who just kept on living in a world that didn't make sense. He pulled a small, worn photograph from his pocket. It was his last picture of Lily, taken on her last good day. Her smile was wide and real, a gap where a tooth had fallen out. For 10 years looking at this picture had been like touching a hot stove, a jolt of pure pain. Now he just looked at her. He saw the joy, he saw the love, he saw his daughter. The memory was clean. He smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Yeah, Maria," he said, his voice finally steady. "I think I am." The world was still haunted. But for the first time, Jack Keller was not. And in a world where humanity's last stand had changed all the rules, that was the only victory that mattered.